Hello, it's Kate from Australian Women in Beekeeping. I'm here with Laura Ferguson, who's all the way from America. She lives in Southern Oregon and she's here in Australia, about to go home tomorrow. She's been to the New South Wales conference, the Amateur Beekeepers Association conference, and gave a talk at the conference there. So, Laura, I'd like to welcome you to Australia. And how did you find the conference?
It was amazing. It was so warm and welcoming, and it was a really wonderful design of the art and science of beekeeping. So they had a lot of really great university science, and they had artists there. They had an incredible photographer there, and even the lady that made the stamps for Australia, she was there describing her process, her quite extensive process of how she came to create those stamps. So it was,
Is that the native bees? The
yes,
native bee stamp collection?
yes. And I learned
Wow.
a ton about how much Australia loves your native bees
Yes.
because you can keep them, and the carbonaria. And somebody said, why do you think they like carbonaria so much? And he said, because it sounds like a good pasta dish.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, just a little bit of a backstory about you, Laura, that, as I said, you're from Southern Oregon and that you are the instigator and facilitator of the College of Melissae, which has been running for 7 years. And that's actually how I met you. And that you have been to Italy before you came to Australia to the conference, The Planet Within, and that you have also been to Apimonda, and you're involved with World Bee Day with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love traveling the world, talking about this really special approach to understanding our relationship with bees. And it's been, yeah, and Apimondia was a real highlight because it was a scientific congress of beekeeping in Istanbul in 2016 in Turkey. And so that was really wonderful to bring the sacred bee to the forefront of a world event at the home of where sacred beekeeping really, I think, was really anchored for thousands and thousands of years. And this year it's going to be in Montreal.
Wow.
So, anybody interested, that'll be in September in Canada. You
Wow.
won't have to deal with American borders. You'll get to go to Canada. Much nicer country.
Oh, would you just like to give us a little bit of a backstory about how did your interest in bees start and how did it lead on to the College of Melissa? Where did it all start for
Oh,
you?
that's a good question. I think it was actually, I was around maybe 9 or something, very young, and we were at a museum, and the museum had an observation hive in it, and it also had a planetarium, and everybody else wanted to go to the planetarium. And it was around the time Star Wars was happening, so my whole family was into stars, I guess. Here I am dating myself, but there was an observation hive, and I was supposed to find the queen, and I couldn't find the queen. So but I hugged it goodbye, one of those spontaneous child gestures. And when I put my ear up to it, I heard the sound and the warmth, and it just, tears came to my eyes. And it was like a spiritual experience. As I look back on it, I would describe it as a spiritual experience. And then maybe my first, and then fast forward like 30, 40 years, however long it was. And I got my first hive. And then after my dad died, I realized that life is just so short and you're just a dust mote. And so I should just, who cares? Like, just do what you want, what fulfills your heart. And it became I realized that I wanted to do art, bees, and ceremony. And then, so I set out on this road trip. And on the road trip, I ended up having what I would call vision, because I was at this beautiful house sitting with this massive hot tub that you could lay down in. So I was outside watching this lunar eclipse, and all of a sudden it just came to me that if we could study the bee from the perspective of the science and the sacred and the history, or the herstory, and the mystery, and the art and medicine of it and the activism, then we could actually get somewhere, because science was just too limiting and there was so much more. So I didn't even know there was such a thing as the sacred bee, but I just recently discovered that the word Melissa meant honeybee and it meant priestess. And that
Oh.
was the only little pollen grain of information that I had. And wow,
Mm.
you think there's a lot about science about bees, it's equivalent in all these other ways.
And so your background that led you to create the Melissa course,
Mm-hmm.
that's because you're very interested in history.
Yes, yes. My degree is in anthropology and religious studies.
Right.
And so I've always been a seeker, but I've never really believed a religion until I found out about Native American, earth-centered, indigenous religion. And then it's really exciting to find out that European bees are actually a European indigenous shamanic animal. And
Oh.
so there's an entire culture, a very sophisticated and beautiful culture and set of myths and stories that are very similar to Native American natural stories. It's just from the honeybee, that the honeybee is a shaman. It's actually literally a world at this point, a universal messenger from the earth. Everybody knows, from the youngest child to the oldest man, everybody knows what a honeybee is and that there's something going on with the earth because of what the honeybee's telling us. So I just realized, like, as a deep environmentalist, I said that like a spiritual person, like, environmentalism is my spirituality, so as a deep environmentalist, I was just like, realized that this was a messenger for the world, that if we could be like a beehive and think about the earth like the bees do the queen bee, we could really make some changes.
Is that the kinship that you refer to?
The kinship with the bee, yeah, and also like animal communication and how they speak to us personally. They actually really develop, as we all know that are beekeeping, we develop a personal relationship. Like, don't underestimate the power of that intimacy. It's very real and it's very vibrant and important. And we all feel it. We just, our scientific, financial, money oriented, chemical oriented brains don't think about it in the same way, as because we're just like loaded with this other cultural perspective, but yet we feel it. So don't underestimate that intimacy, is kind of what I've discovered and began to teach about.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the message that you brought to Australia at the conference?
It was fun. We had technical difficulties. I seem to always so I said to them, well, this always happens around, really sacred people, because, the technology doesn't work, but that's not true. And what did I bring? I just brought like an overview of what the college themes and theories are, and told a couple stories and just tried to reawaken this concept. And it was an amazing response. I didn't have 1 minute alone, one person after another. It wasn't like I was being mobbed with questions like other speakers were. It was more like people wanted to pull me toward them and say, I feel it too. So it was a much more like, it just was very, people wanted this. And it was amazing. Men and women both were really appreciating it. And it was a real beautiful, warm reception. And I'm coming back. So
Great. So when are you coming back?
well, about 3 or 4 groups are interested in having me come back as different types of workshops, or maybe speaking at other conferences. So maybe it'll be next year around this time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you and I have spoken earlier, and I'm quite fascinated to hear more about your 12 Steps Chemical Addiction Program.
Oh, yeah. That's, bottom line is that that I'm opening my computer so I could read it. But bottom line is that I think that what we have going on in the world is a chemical addiction problem. We're chemically addicted in our agriculture and in our apiculture. And in the United States is different because there is no treatment for foul brood, which is an important, and also the hive beetle in Australia don't have the same kind of devastating viral effects that Varroa does, because Varroa pierces the exoskeleton of the adult bee. They don't just feed on the larva. They actually infect the larva and the adult bee with viruses, and that vector spreads the viruses. That, and I really have to give you a forewarning about the almonds. 90% of our bees go to the almonds because almonds can only be pollinated by Apis mellifera. So 90% of our bees go to the almonds, and that's how we got such bad mites, and that's how we get such bad viral loads, because then they go back out and then they spread it to all the feral colonies. And so the disease progression just cannot be stopped. So, your almond industry is just starting. You only have 200,000 hives going there, but it's migration pollination. And it's just, in this era, is not going to work. In Egypt, it worked great. But, they're only going 100 miles a year or whatever. But here it's like, it's just really dangerous. But what was the question?
It was about your message that you brought to Australia.
Oh yeah, so that's a message I really want to impart on Australia. But no, we were talking about chemical addiction. So,
sorry.
Yeah, so Varroa is treated with chemicals. So now we don't have any bees. We have very few bees that can live without that. But we're thinking wrong.
Yeah,
they are genetically quick moving. So they can heal themselves, and I'm treatment free. And my bees have developed all bees have a socialized immune system, but our bees have developed they stop laying. So they separate themselves from the brood of the Varroa, and they just stop laying for like 3 weeks or 2 weeks. And then the Varroa don't have anywhere else to go.
Does it break the cycle?
It breaks the cycle. And so what happens is that normal beekeepers will say, well, then you have to kill the queen.
Yeah.
And so they immediately put a new queen in there, and they immediately have problems again. And so that's the chemical addiction. And then with our farming, glyphosate there are 11,000 cases against Monsanto in the US right now, and they're winning. Mm-hmm. We are winning because glyphosate and land grant universities and the chemical companies are these monolithic gorgons that are just lying and manipulating for the buck. And they've convinced farmers in America. We subsidize farmers, and the people that are and they have to sign agreements that they'll use chemicals in order to receive the subsidies. So we're just talking about this huge drug addicted, it's just like drug addiction anywhere. And the worst part about it is that the bees are treated like the companion sex workers, because we're just importing them in, keeping them young, just moving them and just on a circuit and not caring ethically about who they are at all. So chemical addiction, it's like we've got the pushers in office, and it's a mafioso. And so there's a 12-step program, to get out of chemical addiction and go organic and do it 1 yard at a time, and we can do this. And you're really lucky because you have forage, because you have a low population in this country, because your population densities are in cities and then lots of rural areas. Your agriculture is mixed up with the bush. So you have this opportunity for the species. But if we do migratory Apis mellifera, you're going to lose your pollinators. You're going to lose your native pollinators, and then you're going to lose your bush. The bush country will begin to fail.
Is that what's happened in America with the
yeah, we have so many species, and I'm sure I haven't really researched Australia, but we have so many species of native bees that are dying because we're breaking up their habitat with monocropping. And then, like, like the carbonara, I think it is, can only go through, it only goes 300 meters, as opposed to honeybees that go, I don't know what you call it in kilometers, but it's 3 miles, you know? So, so that's a huge difference in range. So if you put a shopping mall and an almond orchard in between the two areas, they can't mate. So they die. They die like species death. It's not just like an individual death. It's like species death, you know? So it's really, you know, you're really lucky. You have an opportunity, you know, follow these bad examples of the, you know, the big brother in the Orwellian sense over here, because in the States, it's just, you know, it's a lesson in a disaster. And I had no idea that you guys were doing almonds. I thought that was a uniquely American problem. But that's why we're importing bees. That's why we're importing bees from Australia. And that's why we get $250 American per hive to go for 3 weeks to the almonds, because it's such horrible losses. Don't do it. You know.
So what's the solution then to the almond industry in Australia?
Make sure that you have 3-season forage, multi-diverse forms, work on permaculture systems, don't monocrop. So you can have 10, like we have 10 square miles of almonds, and only almonds, applied with fungicide and pesticides. And then there's no ground cover. So it's just straight on desert. So we're choking off rivers and pipelining water from the Sacramento River, instead of going into the ocean where it dilutes these bays. We're having, you know, not to mention marine loss, but, you know, if we would just use ground cover, use multifloral so that bees are getting a variety, and have it bioregional bees. So have industries there that are building up their bees through a massive level of 3-season forage, and then just keep the bees going, you know. But what, you know, we're having people that are moving 100,000 hives or 10,000 or 50,000 hives from New York to California in semi-trucks up and over the mountains. So just switch the model. And the World Health Organization says that the only way we're going to, quote unquote, save the planet and feed the people isn't through greenwashing, GMOs, and glyphosate use. It's through small-scale, localized organic farming. And the same should be said about bees.
Okay.
Small-scale, localized beekeeping.
Okay.
Just have all the neighbors come, and it's a big party, and everybody brings their bees, and they all have them numbered, and everybody has a party, and, you know, like, and everybody brings their bees, and it just locally, you know, and then have the honey festival, you know, and the, you know, it's just, to bring it back, you know, don't lose it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's your message to hobby beekeepers in Australia?
That you will be the ones that can find the mites, because commercialized beekeepers cannot inspect their bees. And if you do get the varroa mite, treat it like AFB, eradicate. But do not treat it if it is here to stay and it starts to be like, well, it's here, it's not going anywhere. Don't medicate. Allow the bees to die. And, you know, I don't know, you have a much more intimate relationship with your stingless bee, but I believe that what we could have and should have done, and I'm seeing it in Jamaica and in Peru, where the bees are not treated with chemicals because they can't afford it or it's not accessible, their bees are still thriving. They end up surviving. They get, the ones that can't handle varroa die, and the ones that can survive. So moving in.
They call that, it's got a name where the genes switch on.
Yeah, epigenetic.
Yes.
And for honeybees, it's not just the genetic, it's the socialized behaviors. Okay. So you're right, it is genetics, because what they'll do is the ones that are able, yes, you're right. Epigenetics is the environment forces the genes to move, to be, but they'll develop, they can learn, just like they can go through a maze. They can be like, screw this, we don't want this here, let's stop doing it, and increase their behaviors and teach it. but they're not going to teach it if we're pinching the queen every year. Then that behavior is lost. So that's the other thing. Stop pinching. Let swarms happen. Stop resisting. Just like how many women do real well if they have a chastity belt on? How long are you going to be happy and healthy if you're wearing your chastity belt? No, go get some and enjoy life and fly. Like the flying of the queen. There's rumor in the sacred beekeeping circles that to fly is to expose the queen once a year to light, and that light activates her ovaries and also gives that body a sense of we are one body. It gives her swarming, gives that organism the sense of unity. And so who's to say that isn't just as important as nutrition and placement and how we manage, how do they feel about themselves?
I think it's finding the balance, like we have biosecurity requirements here in Australia, probably like you do in America. And it's finding the balance with that too.
You're way better at it here. You're way more informed because we'll do anything for a buck, So, and we've already had this super expansive mentality of anything we want, we can have, and anywhere we want to go, we can go. And so we've done a lot of these. That's the model, is the destructive model. Whereas your biosecurity is way serious. Your visa, all the things you have to do, way more serious than the United States. We're getting more serious. You can't import anything with bees. You can still bring in honey, but you can't bring in any bees or any bee equipment and things like that. But Australia is way more serious because you have species that, like cats. Cats will kill all the flightless birds. So you guys have this awareness of invasiveness, and we just don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's hope. There's hope for America.
There's hope for Australia. I don't know if there's not according to what I've seen. Fingers crossed, Australia won't follow.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe we'll all get that 100th monkey or that solution effect where we'll all get it all at once. Someone like, you know what? Stop plastic, stop fossil fuels, stop chemicals, stop the bankers, and we're going to change. And it's a spiritual revolution, which is why the bee is a perfect model, because it's this idea that if we all work together and we all just do our 1/12 of a teaspoon, we can have more than enough.
Yeah.
For everybody.
Also, too, can you just explain briefly about your College of Melissa course that you run?
Yeah, I'm running a little deal for Australians. If I could get 5 or 6 people in, I'm running a half price deal for Australians, but it's an online course. It runs 10 months and you take it for 2 years. And and we study all of those paths. So we really get into the science, all the stuff that we've been talking about. So you really have a vocabulary, because I want our people to be able to move in regular beekeeping realms and not sound ditzy. This is a shamanic pursuit, which means we are becoming doctors of bees, not necessarily PhD students, which are like focused like little mice on little particular ideas. We are more like liberal, like a PhD and a liberal sciences degree kind of. And that's how I've designed it to be that, like that as an example, college course. And then we study the sacred, which is what are the principles that make it unviolatable, like why we should not violate these principles. And science just takes us there. You start looking at it scientifically, that science becomes a metaphor for the sacred. And then the history, which is actually the herstory of cultures around the world. We're studying all the time different cultural perspectives. And then the mystery, what is your animal communication, your own personal relationship? Science has proven that it changes our brainwaves, and cultures around the world, their medical colleges started, and their shamanic relationship with the earth started from bees. And then the apotherapy element, which is like actually like 15 or 16 products out of the hive, not just the top 6. And then activism, because that what you love, you protect. All of our students do an activism.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So, do you also
wait, your activism project was Australian Women in Beekeeping. You did. I think you either started that or started a LinkedIn group. I remember that was your
Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with your course that you run, do you also touch on the practicalities of beekeeping, or are you
Absolutely,
more into
methodology? The first 2 months are all the and we have different methodologies that we've developed because we're developing a personal relationship. Use a feather instead of a brush. Do you have to use smoke? Those kinds of things. And we meet twice a month. And the American one the students have grown to have a week. Every other week they have meetings, and every other week we have class. So it's become this really nice culture. And I'm running a Southern Hemisphere one, so we can do it in your time zone. So you don't have to do it at 6 in the morning. Yeah.
And when are you planning on doing this?
It's opening up in August, so I'm taking enrollment now. So I'm trying to do it in your winter.
Okay, so will you be able to provide me with a link so I can post it into Australian Women in Beekeeping?
Yeah, just go to my webpage, and it's
it's the College of Melissa.
Yeah, College of the Melissa, Melissae.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will put a link in the feed for Australian Women in Beekeeping members, and that just about wraps up our time, Laura. Right. So thank you so much for your time. I know you are so tired.
Yeah, and if people want to hear, I have a weekly radio show on your Friday morning at 6 a.m. Okay. I know, but you could download it or record it.
Where do we find that? Is that also on your website?
There's links on my website, but it's kskq.org.
Okay.
It's an actual radio show, but we broadcast it also online.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Have a safe flight back to America tomorrow.
Thank you.
And I am sure we will talk again, Laura.
And I'll see you next year because I'll
You bet. You bet. That's fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Ciao, my
friend.
Bye.